In the misty highlands of Scotland, archaeologist Barry Cunliffe carefully brushes centuries of accumulated soil from what appears to be an intricately carved stone surface. The morning light filtering through the ancient oak trees that have stood sentinel over this hilltop for generations uncounted. As the delicate work progresses, the unmistakable patterns of Latine art emerge from the earth, spirals and interlacing knots that speak of a sophisticated artistic tradition, spanning centuries across vast territories of ancient Europe, each curve and line telling stories of warriors and druids, of sacred groves and hill forts, of a people whose influence stretched from the Atlantic shores of Ireland to the plains of Anatolia. The stone beneath Cunliffe's brush reveals itself to be part of a much larger complex, one of thousands of archaeological sites across Europe that continue to reshape our understanding of Celtic civilization, a culture that flourished for over a millennium before the Roman conquest began to transform the ancient world. This particular discovery, made in the summer of 2018 near the village of Kilmartin in Argyll, represents just one thread in the vast tapestry of Celtic heritage that archaeologists have been painstakingly reconstructing for over 2 centuries, utilizing increasingly sophisticated techniques of excavation, analysis, and interpretation to piece together the story of a people who left no comprehensive written histories of their own, but whose material culture speaks eloquently of complex societies, advanced metallurgy, sophisticated religious beliefs, and extensive trade networks that connected communities across thousands of miles. The emergence of recognizably Celtic culture from the archaeological record presents a fascinating puzzle of cultural transmission, technological innovation, and social organization that challenges many traditional assumptions about prehistoric European societies and their capabilities. Archaeological evidence suggests that the roots of Celtic civilization can be traced back to the late Bronze Age cultures of Central Europe, particularly in the regions that would later become Austria, Switzerland, and southern Germany, where communities began developing distinctive burial practices, metalworking techniques, and artistic styles that would eventually spread across much of Western and Central Europe through a complex process of migration, cultural exchange, and local adaptation. The Hallstatt culture, named after the famous archaeological site in Austria where extensive salt mining operations provided both wealth and preservation conditions that allowed remarkable organic materials to survive, represents one of the earliest manifestations of what scholars recognize as Proto-Celtic civilization, flourishing from approximately 800 to 450 BCE and characterized by elaborate burials, sophisticated iron technology, and extensive trade connections that brought Mediterranean goods to the heart of temperate Europe. Excavations at Hallstatt itself, which began in the 19th century and continue to this day, have revealed a settlement of remarkable sophistication, with evidence of large-scale industrial salt production, extensive workshops for metalworking and textile production, and burial practices that included the interment of complete four-wheeled wagons, alongside their owners, accompanied by bronze vessels, iron weapons, amber jewelry, and other grave goods that speak to both local craftsmanship and long-distance trade relationships. The preservation conditions created by the salt mining activities at Hallstatt have provided archaeologists with unprecedented insights into the daily lives of these early Celtic communities, including organic materials such as wooden tools, leather clothing, textiles, and even human remains that retain hair, skin, and other soft tissues that normally decompose completely in most archaeological contexts. These remarkable discoveries have allowed researchers to understand not only the material culture of early Celtic society, but also details of diet, health, appearance, and even the specific causes of death of individuals who lived over 2 millennia ago, creating an intimate connection between modern investigators and ancient peoples that brings the archaeological record to life in ways that pottery sherds and metal artifacts alone cannot achieve. The transition from the Hallstatt to the Latine period, occurring around 450 BCE, marks a crucial transformation in Celtic culture that coincided with increased contact between Celtic communities and the expanding Mediterranean civilizations, particularly the Greeks and Etruscans, whose artistic influences can be detected in the evolution of Celtic decorative styles. While the fundamental character of Celtic culture remained distinctively Northern European in its emphasis on warrior society, oral tradition, and nature-based religious practices. Latane culture, named after the type site on Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland where extensive votive deposits were discovered in the 19th century, represents the flowering of Celtic civilization across Europe, characterized by distinctive, curvilinear art styles, advanced iron technology, oppida or fortified settlements that function as centers of trade and manufacture, and increasingly complex social hierarchies that supported specialized craftsmen, warriors, and religious practitioners, who served communities that could number in the tens of thousands. The spread of Latane culture across Europe demonstrates the remarkable mobility and adaptability of Celtic peoples, who established settlements from Ireland to Turkey, from Scotland to Spain, creating a network of related but distinct communities that shared common artistic traditions, religious practices, technological innovations, and social structures while adapting to local environmental conditions and incorporating influences from neighboring non-Celtic populations. Archaeological investigations at major Latane sites such as Bibracte in France, Manching in Germany, and Danbury in England have revealed the sophisticated urban planning, manufacturing capabilities, and administrative structures that characterized mature Celtic society, with evidence of specialized workshops producing everything from fine metalwork to glass beads. Extensive fortification systems designed to protect both residential areas and industrial facilities, and organized storage systems that suggest centralized authority and systematic economic planning. The discovery of standardized weights and measures, along with evidence of systematic taxation or tribute collection, indicates that Celtic societies had developed complex administrative systems that could coordinate economic activities across large territories and support population centers that rivaled contemporary Mediterranean cities in their size and sophistication. Celtic technological achievements, particularly in metallurgy, represent some of the most advanced developments of the Iron Age world, with Celtic smiths producing steel of exceptional quality through techniques that would not be matched in Europe until the medieval period, creating weapons and tools whose reputation for excellence was acknowledged, even by their Roman enemies, and whose influence can be traced in the development of military technology throughout ancient Europe. The famous Celtic longswords, with their distinctive anthropomorphic hilts and superior steel construction, represent not merely weapons but symbols of social status and technological mastery that required years of training to produce and even more years of practice to wield effectively, serving as both practical implements of warfare and ritual objects that embodied the spiritual and social values of Celtic warrior culture. Celtic artistic achievements during the Latane period encompass far more than weapons and jewelry, extending to monumental stone sculpture, elaborate metalwork for both secular and religious purposes, sophisticated techniques of enameling and glass production, and the creation of some of the most beautiful and technically accomplished decorative objects ever produced in prehistoric Europe, many of which continue to inspire artists and craftsmen to this day. The famous Gundestrup cauldron, discovered in a Danish bog but clearly of Celtic manufacture, demonstrates the remarkable technical skill and artistic vision of Celtic craftsmen, with its intricate repoussed silver panels depicting complex mythological scenes that provide insights into Celtic religious beliefs and ceremonial practices, while showcasing techniques of metalworking that required generations of accumulated knowledge and specialized training to master. The social organization of Celtic society reveals a complex hierarchy built upon kinship networks, warrior bonds, and specialized roles that supported both local autonomy and broader cultural unity across the diverse landscapes of Celtic Europe, with archaeological evidence suggesting that individual settlements maintained their own identity and leadership structures while participating in larger networks of alliance, trade, and cultural exchange that could span hundreds of miles and involve multiple tribal groups. Celtic settlements ranged from small farmsteads housing extended families to massive oppida that functioned as regional centers of population, trade, and political authority, with some sites such as Bibracte in France and Manching in Germany supporting populations estimated at over 10,000 inhabitants, and featuring sophisticated urban infrastructure including organized street systems, designated industrial areas, standardized housing types, and centralized facilities for storage, and defense that required coordinated planning and administration on a scale that challenges traditional assumptions about prehistoric European societies and their capabilities. Archaeological evidence suggests that the roots of Celtic civilization can be traced back to the late Bronze Age cultures of Central Europe, particularly in the regions that would later become Austria, Switzerland, and southern Germany, where communities began developing distinctive burial practices, metalworking techniques, and artistic styles that would eventually spread across much of Western and Central Europe through a complex process of migration, cultural exchange, and local adaptation. The Hallstatt culture, named after the famous archaeological site in Austria where extensive salt mining operations provided both wealth and preservation conditions that allowed remarkable organic materials to survive, represents one of the earliest manifestations of what scholars recognize as Proto-Celtic civilization, flourishing from approximately 800 to 450 BC and characterized by elaborate burials, sophisticated iron technology, and extensive trade connections that brought Mediterranean goods to the heart of temperate Europe. Excavations at Hallstatt itself, which began in the 19th century and continue to this day, have revealed a settlement of remarkable sophistication, with evidence of large-scale industrial salt production, extensive workshops for metalworking and textile production, and burial practices that included the interment of complete four-wheeled wagons, alongside their owners, accompanied by bronze vessels, iron weapons, amber jewelry, and other grave goods that speak to both local craftsmanship and long-distance trade relationships. The preservation conditions created by the salt mining activities at Hallstatt have provided archaeologists with unprecedented insights into the daily lives of these early Celtic communities, including organic materials such as wooden tools, leather clothing, textiles, and even human remains that retain hair, skin, and other soft tissues that normally decompose completely in most archaeological contexts. These remarkable discoveries have allowed researchers to understand not only the material culture of early Celtic society, but also details of diet, health, appearance, and even the specific causes of death of individuals who lived over 2 millennia ago, creating an intimate connection between modern investigators and ancient peoples that brings the archaeological record to life in ways that pottery, sherds, and metal artifacts alone cannot achieve. The transition from the Hallstatt to the Latine period, occurring around 450 BC, marks a crucial transformation in Celtic culture that coincided with increased contact between Celtic communities and the expanding Mediterranean civilizations, particularly the Greeks and Etruscans, whose artistic influences can be detected in the evolution of Celtic decorative styles. While the fundamental character of Celtic culture remained distinctively Northern European in its emphasis on warrior society, oral tradition, and nature-based religious practices. Latine culture, named after the type site on Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland where extensive votive deposits were discovered in the 19th century, represents the flowering of Celtic civilization across Europe, characterized by distinctive, curvilinear art styles, advanced iron technology, oppida or fortified settlements that functioned as centers of trade and manufacture, and increasingly complex social hierarchies that supported specialized craftsmen, warriors, and religious practitioners, who served communities that could number in the tens of thousands. The spread of Latin culture across Europe demonstrates the remarkable mobility and adaptability of Celtic peoples, who established settlements from Ireland to Turkey, from Scotland to Spain, creating a network of related but distinct communities that shared common artistic traditions, religious practices, technological innovations, and social structures while adapting to local environmental conditions and incorporating influences from neighboring non-Celtic populations. Archaeological investigations at major Latin sites such as Bibracte in France, Manching in Germany, and Danbury in England have revealed the sophisticated urban planning, manufacturing capabilities, and administrative structures that characterized mature Celtic society, with evidence of specialized workshops producing everything from fine metalwork to glass beads, extensive fortification systems designed to protect both residential areas and industrial facilities, and organized storage systems that suggest centralized authority and systematic economic planning. The discovery of standardized weights and measures, along with evidence of systematic taxation or tribute collection, indicates that Celtic societies had developed complex administrative systems that could coordinate economic activities across large territories and support population centers that rivaled contemporary Mediterranean cities in their size and sophistication. Celtic technological achievements, particularly in metallurgy, represent some of the most advanced developments of the Iron Age world, with Celtic smiths producing steel of exceptional quality through techniques that would not be matched in Europe until the medieval period, creating weapons and tools whose reputation for excellence was acknowledged, even by their Roman enemies, and whose influence can be traced in the development of military technology throughout ancient Europe. The famous Celtic longswords, with their distinctive anthropomorphic hilts and superior steel construction, represent not merely weapons but symbols of social status and technological mastery that required years of training to produce and even more years of practice to wield effectively, serving as both practical implements of warfare and ritual objects that embodied the spiritual and social values of Celtic warrior culture. Celtic artistic achievements during the Latin period encompass far more than weapons and jewelry, extending to monumental stone sculpture, elaborate metalwork for both secular and religious purposes, sophisticated techniques of enameling and glass production, and the creation of some of the most beautiful and technically accomplished decorative objects ever produced in prehistoric Europe, many of which continue to inspire artists and craftsmen to this day. The famous Gundestrup cauldron, discovered in a Danish bog but clearly of Celtic manufacture, demonstrates the remarkable technical skill and artistic vision of Celtic craftsmen, with its intricate repoussed silver panels depicting complex mythological scenes that provide insights into Celtic religious beliefs and ceremonial practices, while showcasing techniques of metalworking that require generations of accumulated knowledge and specialized training to master. The social organization of Celtic society reveals a complex hierarchy built upon kinship networks, warrior bonds, and specialized roles that supported both local autonomy and broader cultural unity across the diverse landscapes of Celtic Europe, with archaeological evidence suggesting that individual settlements maintained their own identity and leadership structures while participating in larger networks of alliance, trade, and cultural exchange that could span hundreds of miles and involve multiple tribal groups. Celtic settlements range from small farmsteads housing extended families to massive oppida that functioned as regional centers of population, trade, and political authority, with some sites such as Bibracte in France and Manching in Germany supporting populations estimated at over 10,000 inhabitants, and featuring sophisticated urban infrastructure including organized street systems, designated industrial areas, standardized housing types, and centralized facilities for storage and defense that required coordinated planning and administration on a scale that challenges traditional assumptions about the organizational capabilities of non-literate societies. The Celtic elite, whose burials provide some of the most spectacular archaeological discoveries in European prehistory, appear to have derived their authority from a combination of warrior prowess, control over trade relationships, religious authority, and kinship connections that created complex webs of obligation and alliance stretching across tribal boundaries and linguistic divisions, with individual leaders sometimes buried with grave goods that include imports from as far away as China and India alongside locally produced items of extraordinary craftsmanship that demonstrate both their access to exotic materials and their support of highly skilled local artisans. The famous Vix burial in France, dating to around 500 BCE, exemplifies the wealth and international connections of the Celtic elite, with its massive bronze crater of Greek manufacture that stands over 5 feet tall and weighs over 450 pounds, accompanied by gold torques, imported wine vessels, a four-wheeled wagon, and other grave goods that speak to participation in trade networks extending throughout the ancient world. While the fact that the central burial appears to be that of a woman suggests that Celtic society may have offered greater opportunities for female leadership than many contemporary civilizations, archaeological analysis of Celtic settlement patterns reveals sophisticated understanding of landscape management, agricultural techniques, and resource exploitation that supported population densities comparable to those of the Roman world, with evidence of systematic field systems, advanced techniques of animal husbandry, innovative approaches to iron production and other industrial activities, and comprehensive knowledge of local environmental conditions that allowed Celtic communities to thrive in diverse ecological settings, from the Mediterranean climates of southern France and Spain to the harsh conditions of northern Scotland and Ireland. The Celtic agricultural system appears to have been based on mixed farming that combined crop production with livestock raising, supplemented by hunting, fishing, and gathering activities that took advantage of seasonal abundance and provided security against crop failure, with archaeological evidence suggesting that Celtic farmers practiced crop rotation, soil improvement through manuring and other techniques, and selective breeding of domestic animals that produce larger and more productive varieties of cattle, sheep, pigs, and horses than had been available in earlier periods. Celtic technological innovations extended far beyond metallurgy to include advanced techniques of textile production that created fabrics whose quality and design influenced Roman fashion, sophisticated methods of food preservation and storage that allowed communities to survive harsh winters and support large populations, innovative approaches to construction that produce buildings and fortifications of remarkable durability and effectiveness, and the development of wheel transport that facilitated both local movement and long-distance trade connections, essential to the prosperity of Celtic civilization. The famous Celtic war chariots, which so impressed Roman observers that they devoted extensive attention to describing their construction and use, represent sophisticated understanding of engineering principles, metallurgy, and animal training that produce vehicles capable of operating effectively in battle, while serving as symbols of elite status and technological achievement that required the coordination of multiple specialized crafts, including wheelwrights, metalworkers, leather workers, and horse trainers. Celtic religious practices, as revealed through archaeological investigation of sacred sites, votive deposits, and burial customs, demonstrate sophisticated theological concepts and ceremonial traditions that integrated natural settings, astronomical observations, elaborate ritual objects, and community participation in ways that reinforce social bonds, while providing explanatory frameworks for understanding the relationship between human communities and the natural world that sustained them. Sacred sites such as the numerous Celtic temples found throughout France, Britain, and other Celtic territories reveal architectural sophistication and astronomical alignment that required advanced mathematical knowledge and coordinated community effort. while the presence of votive deposits containing thousands of carefully crafted objects suggests systematic religious practices that involve regular community participation and substantial resource investment over extended periods of time. The discovery of bog bodies throughout Celtic Europe, preserved by the unique chemical conditions of peat bogs, has provided unprecedented insights into Celtic religious practices, revealing evidence of human sacrifice that appears to have been conducted according to strict ritual protocols, and may have been associated with specific religious festivals or crisis situations. While the careful treatment of these individuals both before and after death suggests that such practices were viewed as sacred obligations rather than mere violence, and were probably conducted by specialized religious practitioners following ancient traditions. Celtic art during the La Tène period represents one of the most distinctive and influential artistic traditions of the ancient world, characterized by flowing curvilinear designs, sophisticated techniques of stylization and abstraction, integration of natural and mythological motifs, and technical mastery of diverse materials and production techniques that created objects of extraordinary beauty and symbolic complexity that continue to influence artistic production throughout the Celtic regions of Europe. The development of distinctive regional variations within the broader La Tène tradition demonstrates both the unity and diversity of Celtic culture, with local artistic schools developing particular specializations in metalwork, stone carving, pottery production, or other crafts while maintaining participation in broader networks of stylistic influence and technical innovation that ensured continued evolution and refinement of artistic traditions over several centuries. The expansion of Celtic peoples across Europe during the La Tène period represents one of the most significant population movements of the ancient world, involving migrations, conquests, and cultural diffusion that established Celtic communities from the Atlantic coast of Ireland and Portugal to the Black Sea shores of Romania and the highlands of Anatolia in modern Turkey, creating a vast network of related but distinct societies that shared common cultural foundations while adapting to diverse environmental conditions and political circumstances across a geographical area larger than the Roman Empire. At its greatest extent, archaeological evidence for this expansion includes the widespread distribution of distinctive La Tène artifacts, the establishment of characteristic Celtic settlement types and fortification systems, the adoption of Celtic burial practices and religious traditions, and the spread of Celtic artistic styles and technological innovations that can be traced across thousands of miles and several centuries of cultural development, suggesting both large-scale population movements and intensive cultural exchange between established and newly settled communities. The Celtic migration into the Italian peninsula during the 4th century BCE brought Celtic warriors into direct conflict with the expanding Roman Republic, resulting in dramatic encounters such as the sack of Rome in 390 BCE that left lasting impressions on Roman historical consciousness and contributed to the development of Roman military tactics and strategic thinking that would eventually prove decisive in the conquest of Celtic territories throughout Europe. Celtic settlement in northern Italy, particularly in the Po Valley region that the Romans called Cisalpine Gaul, established prosperous communities that combined Celtic cultural traditions with influences from Etruscan and Greek neighbors, producing distinctive artistic and technological innovations, while maintaining connections with Celtic communities north of the Alps through trade networks and alliance systems that persisted until the Roman conquest of the region in the 2nd century BCE. The famous Celtic raids into Greece and Anatolia during the 3rd century BCE demonstrate the military effectiveness and organizational capabilities of Celtic societies, with Celtic armies penetrating as far south as Delphi in Greece and establishing permanent settlements in central Anatolia, where the Galatians maintained Celtic language, customs, and identity for several centuries while adapting to the political and economic conditions of the Hellenistic world. Archaeological investigations in Anatolia have revealed Celtic burial practices, artistic traditions, and settlement patterns that clearly demonstrate the successful transplantation of Celtic culture to distant territories, while inscriptions and literary sources indicate that Celtic languages continued to be spoken in parts of Anatolia well into the Roman period, providing evidence of the remarkable persistence of Celtic cultural identity even under conditions of geographic isolation and political subordination. The establishment of Celtic communities in the Iberian Peninsula involved complex interactions with existing populations that produced distinctive Celt-Iberian cultures that combined Celtic traditions with local Iberian influences, resulting in unique artistic styles, religious practices, and settlement patterns that can be traced archaeologically through distinctive pottery types, fortified hilltop settlements called castros, and burial customs that blend Celtic and pre-Celtic traditions in ways that illuminate the process of cultural synthesis and adaptation. Celtic military organization and warfare tactics evolved considerably during the period of expansion, with archaeological evidence suggesting the development of increasingly sophisticated strategies, weapons, and organizational structures that allowed Celtic armies to achieve remarkable successes against established powers, including the Romans, Greeks, and various other peoples throughout Europe, while the adoption of new technologies and tactics from defeated enemies ensured continuous military innovation and adaptation. The famous Celtic warrior culture, with its emphasis on individual prowess, elaborate weapons and armor, and ritualized combat practices, provided the organizational framework for these military achievements while also serving important social and religious functions that reinforced community identity and provided mechanisms for social mobility and status acquisition that helped maintain social cohesion during periods of rapid change and territorial expansion. Celtic fortification systems, ranging from simple hill forts to massive oppida with elaborate defensive works, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of military engineering and siege warfare that allowed Celtic communities to resist conquest for extended periods while providing secure bases for offensive operations, trade activities, and cultural development that supported the prosperity and growth of Celtic civilization. Throughout the expansion period, the construction of these fortifications required enormous investments of labor and resources that could only be mobilized through effective political organization and economic coordination, suggesting that Celtic societies had developed administrative capabilities and leadership structures comparable to those of contemporary Mediterranean civilizations, despite the absence of writing systems and formal bureaucratic institutions that characterize Greek and Roman governance. Celtic naval capabilities, evidenced by archaeological discoveries of sophisticated boat-building techniques and navigation equipment, enabled maritime expansion that established Celtic settlements throughout the Atlantic regions, including Ireland, Scotland, and possibly even more distant territories, while also supporting extensive trade networks that brought exotic goods from the Mediterranean world to Celtic communities throughout northern and western Europe. The famous Celtic cuirass and other vessel types, constructed using advanced knowledge of marine engineering and materials science, allowed Celtic seafarers to navigate challenging ocean conditions and establish permanent settlements on remote islands, while also serving as platforms for fishing, trading, and military activities that supported the economic and political development of coastal Celtic communities. Cultural exchange between Celtic and non-Celtic peoples during the expansion period produced significant innovations in technology, art, religion, and social organization that enriched Celtic civilization while also contributing to the cultural development of neighboring societies, with archaeological evidence showing the adoption of Celtic techniques and styles by non-Celtic peoples alongside the integration of foreign elements into Celtic culture through processes of selective borrowing and creative adaptation. The linguistic evidence for Celtic expansion preserved in place names, inscriptions, and the survival of Celtic languages in various regions, provides additional confirmation of the geographical extent and cultural impact of Celtic settlement patterns, while also revealing the complex processes of language change, cultural assimilation, and identity maintenance that occurred as Celtic communities established themselves in diverse environments and political contexts throughout ancient Europe. Celtic social structure during the height of Latine civilization reveals a sophisticated system of hierarchical organization based on kinship networks, warrior bonds, craft specialization, and religious authority that provided both stability and flexibility necessary for maintaining large-scale societies, while accommodating rapid territorial expansion and cultural change, with archaeological evidence suggesting that Celtic communities developed institutional frameworks capable of coordinating economic activities, military operations, and religious observances across tribal boundaries and linguistic divisions that encompass millions of people scattered across vast territories. The Celtic elite, whose elaborate burials and rich material culture provide extensive archaeological documentation, appear to have maintained their authority through complex combinations of inherited status, personal achievement, religious sanction, and control over economic resources that included both local production and long-distance trade relationships, with individual leaders sometimes accumulating wealth and influence that extended across multiple tribal territories and enabled them to commission artistic works, sponsor religious activities, and maintain retinues of warriors and craftsmen that rivaled those of contemporary Mediterranean rulers. Archaeological analysis of elite Celtic burials reveals not only the extraordinary wealth and artistic sophistication of the upper classes, but also important information about gender roles, family structures, and succession practices that govern Celtic society, with some of the richest and most elaborate graves belonging to women whose burial goods include symbols of political and religious authority alongside personal ornaments and household items that suggest complex social roles combining domestic, ceremonial, and leadership responsibilities. The famous princely burial at Hochdorf in Germany, dating to around 530 BCE, exemplifies the wealth and international connections of the Celtic elite, while also providing insights into their lifestyle, beliefs, and cultural values, with the deceased buried in a bronze couch within a wooden chamber surrounded by a bronze cauldron, gold-decorated drinking vessels, imported silk textiles, a four-wheeled wagon, and other grave goods that speak to both local craftsmanship and participation in trade networks extending to the Mediterranean world and beyond. Celtic warrior culture, documented through both archaeological evidence and classical literary sources, reveals a society that placed extraordinary emphasis on martial prowess, personal honor, and ritualized combat that served not only military functions but also important social and religious roles in maintaining community identity, providing opportunities for social advancement, and reinforcing the authority of military leaders who could demonstrate their effectiveness in battle while also showing generosity and wisdom in peacetime activities. The archaeological record of Celtic weapons and armor demonstrates continuous innovation and refinement that produced some of the finest military equipment of the ancient world, with Celtic swords, shields, helmets, and other items setting standards for quality and effectiveness that influenced weapon development throughout Europe, while also serving as artistic masterpieces that showcase the technical skills and aesthetic sensibilities of Celtic craftsmen. Celtic religious practitioners, including the famous Druids described by classical authors, appear to have held positions of considerable authority and influence within Celtic society, serving not only as ritual specialists and keepers of traditional knowledge but also as judges, teachers, and political advisors whose decisions could affect entire communities, and whose training required decades of study to master the complex oral traditions, legal codes, and ceremonial practices that govern Celtic religious and social life. Archaeological evidence for Celtic religious practices includes numerous sacred sites, votive deposits, and ritual objects that demonstrate the sophistication and complexity of Celtic spiritual traditions, with major ceremonial centers such as those found in France, Britain, and Ireland requiring substantial community investment and coordinated planning, while serving multiple functions as places of worship, legal proceedings, seasonal festivals, and cultural gatherings that reinforced social bonds and community identity. The role of craftsmen in Celtic society appears to have been particularly important and highly regarded, with skilled metalworkers, potters, textile producers, and other specialists enjoying high status and considerable freedom of movement that allowed them to work for different patrons and communities while developing regional styles and technical innovations that contributed to the overall richness and diversity of Celtic material culture. Archaeological workshops and production sites reveal the sophisticated organization of Celtic craft production, with evidence of specialized training programs, standardized techniques and tools, quality control measures, and distribution networks that supply finished goods to communities throughout the Celtic world, while also providing opportunities for technological innovation and artistic experimentation that kept Celtic culture dynamic and competitive with contemporary civilizations. Celtic agricultural practices and land management systems provided the economic foundation for this complex social organization, with archaeological evidence revealing sophisticated techniques of crop production, animal husbandry, and resource management that supported population densities comparable to those achieved by the Roman Empire, while maintaining sustainable relationships with natural environments that allowed Celtic communities to prosper for many centuries without experiencing the environmental degradation that affected some contemporary civilizations. The Celtic legal system, preserved partially in later Irish and Welsh sources but also evidenced archaeologically through analysis of settlement patterns, burial practices, and material culture distributions, appears to have been based on complex codes of kinship obligation, compensation for injury or property damage, and collective responsibility that provided mechanisms for maintaining social order and resolving disputes without requiring the elaborate bureaucratic structures that characterized Mediterranean civilizations. Celtic trade networks during this period extended throughout the known world, bringing amber from the Baltic Sea, silk from China, ivory from Africa, and other exotic materials to Celtic communities while also distributing Celtic products including metalwork, textiles, and agricultural goods to distant markets, with archaeological evidence suggesting that some Celtic settlements served as major commercial centers, whose prosperity depended on their ability to facilitate and control long-distance trade relationships. The economic organization of Celtic society reveals sophisticated understanding of commercial principles, with evidence of standardized weights and measures, systematic taxation or tribute collection, organized storage and distribution systems, and even primitive forms of coinage that facilitated both local exchange and long-distance trade, while also providing mechanisms for wealth accumulation and social differentiation that supported the elaborate lifestyle of the Celtic elite. Celtic religion and spiritual practices during the Latine period encompass sophisticated theological concepts, elaborate ceremonial traditions, and complex institutional structures that integrated natural settings, astronomical observations, oral traditions, and community participation in ways that provided both explanatory frameworks for understanding the world and practical mechanisms for maintaining social cohesion and cultural continuity across the diverse territories where Celtic peoples established their communities. Archaeological investigation of Celtic sacred sites reveals remarkable consistency in certain basic elements, combined with significant regional variation in specific practices and architectural forms. suggesting both shared fundamental beliefs and local adaptation to particular environmental and cultural conditions that characterize the flexibility and resilience of Celtic religious traditions. The famous Celtic sanctuary at Gournay-sur-Erin in France provides exceptional insights into Celtic religious practices, with archaeological excavations revealing a complex sequence of ritual activities spanning several centuries, including evidence of animal sacrifice, weapon deposits, structured ritual meals, and careful maintenance of sacred spaces that required ongoing community investment and specialized religious knowledge to sustain over extended periods of time. Celtic sacred groves, mentioned frequently in classical sources and identified archaeologically through analysis of pollen samples, artifact distributions, and landscape features, appear to have served as major ceremonial centers where large communities gathered for seasonal festivals, religious instruction, legal proceedings, and other activities that reinforce cultural identity and social bonds, while also providing venues for the transmission of traditional knowledge and the training of new generations of religious practitioners. The archaeological record of Celtic votive offerings reveals extraordinary diversity in both the types of objects deposited and the context of deposition, with dedicated religious sites receiving everything from personal ornaments and weapons to agricultural tools and raw materials, while natural features such as springs, rivers, lakes, and caves also receive systematic deposits that suggest ongoing ritual relationships between human communities and particular landscape features that were considered sacred or spiritually significant. Celtic burial practices during the La Tène period demonstrate sophisticated concepts of afterlife existence and spiritual continuity that required elaborate preparation of the deceased, provision of grave goods necessary for the journey to and existence in the other world, and ongoing ritual attention from surviving family and community members that maintain connections between the living and the dead through ceremonial activities that could continue for generations after individual deaths. The famous Celtic cauldrons, represented by magnificent examples such as the Gundestrup cauldron found in Denmark, appear to have served important ceremonial functions related to concepts of rebirth, transformation, and spiritual renewal that were central to Celtic religious thought, with the complex mythological scenes depicted on these vessels, providing insights into Celtic cosmology, divine hierarchies, and ritual practices that would otherwise be completely unknown due to the absence of written Celtic religious texts from this period. Celtic astronomical knowledge, evidenced through the alignment of major monuments, the timing of seasonal festivals, and the sophisticated calendar systems preserved in later sources such as the Coligny calendar from France, reveals advanced mathematical and observational skills that allowed Celtic religious practitioners to predict eclipses, coordinate ceremonial activities across large territories, and maintain accurate records of seasonal cycles essential for agricultural planning and religious observance. The role of water in Celtic religion appears to have been particularly important, with archaeological evidence showing systematic deposition of valuable objects in rivers, springs, and lakes throughout Celtic territories, while the construction of elaborate wooden structures in wetland environments suggests specialized ritual activities that took advantage of the spiritual significance of liminal zones between terrestrial and aquatic environments. Celtic religious art, characterized by sophisticated symbolic systems and advanced techniques of representation that combine naturalistic and abstract elements in unique and influential ways, served not only decorative functions but also important roles in the transmission of religious knowledge, the identification of sacred spaces and objects, and the creation of appropriate spiritual atmospheres for ceremonial activities that require participants to enter altered states of consciousness or spiritual awareness. The famous Celtic stone sculptures found throughout Europe demonstrate remarkable consistency in certain iconographic elements while also showing significant regional variation in style. and subject matter, suggesting both shared religious concepts and local interpretations of fundamental spiritual principles that allowed Celtic religion to maintain coherence across diverse cultural and geographical settings. Celtic seasonal festivals, preserved in later literary sources but also evidenced archaeologically through analysis of site, use patterns and artifact distributions, appear to have served crucial functions in maintaining community cohesion, marking important transitions in agricultural and pastoral cycles, and providing opportunities for large-scale social and religious activities that reinforce cultural identity and spiritual connections, while also facilitating economic exchange and political negotiation between different communities and tribal groups. The sophisticated knowledge systems maintained by Celtic religious practitioners encompass not only theological and ceremonial expertise but also practical skills in medicine, law, astronomy, agriculture, and other areas essential for community survival and prosperity, with the famous Druids serving as repositories of cultural knowledge whose training required decades of study and whose influence extended across tribal and territorial bound areas throughout the Celtic world. Archaeological evidence for Celtic healing practices includes specialized ritual sites associated with medicinal springs and other therapeutic features, along with sophisticated knowledge of plant medicines, surgical techniques, and psychological healing methods that compared favorably with contemporary Mediterranean medical traditions, while also incorporating distinctive Celtic understanding of the relationships between spiritual and physical health. Celtic religious concepts of divine kingship and sacred leadership created complex relationships between political and religious authority that influenced the development of Celtic social organization and provided legitimacy for elite rule while also constraining the actions of leaders through religious obligations and ceremonial requirements that ensured their continued connection to community values and spiritual traditions that transcended individual ambition or personal interest. The military organization and warfare practices of Celtic societies reveal sophisticated strategies, advanced weaponry, and complex tactical systems that enabled Celtic armies to achieve remarkable successes against some of the most formidable opponents of the ancient world, including the Roman legions, Greek city-states, and various other peoples throughout Europe and the Mediterranean region, while also serving important social functions in maintaining community identity, providing opportunities for social advancement, and reinforcing the authority of political and military leaders, who demonstrated their effectiveness in both combat and peacetime activities. Archaeological analysis of Celtic weapons and armor demonstrates continuous innovation and refinement that produced military equipment of exceptional quality and effectiveness, with Celtic swords in particular achieving legendary status for their superior steel construction, balanced design, and durability that made them highly sought after by warriors throughout the ancient world, including Roman soldiers who often preferred captured Celtic weapons to their own standard equipment. The famous Celtic longswords, with their distinctive anthropomorphic hilts and sophisticated metallurgy that produce flexible blades capable of maintaining sharp edges through extended combat, represent not merely weapons but artistic masterpieces that embodied the technological skills, aesthetic sensibilities, and spiritual beliefs of Celtic warrior culture while serving as symbols of social status and personal identity that were often buried with their owners as essential equipment for existence in the afterlife. Celtic shield designs, documented through both archaeological discoveries of surviving examples and artistic representations on sculptures, coins, and decorative metalwork, reveal sophisticated understanding of defensive principles combined with aesthetic considerations that produce protection equipment that was both effective in battle and visually impressive, with many shields incorporating elaborate decorative elements that identified their bearers, tribal affiliations, social status, and military achievements. The development of Celtic cavalry represents one of their most significant military innovations, with archaeological evidence suggesting that Celtic peoples were among the first in Europe to develop effective techniques for mounted warfare that maximize the mobility and shock impact of horse-mounted warriors, while also creating elite military units whose members enjoyed high social status and considerable political influence within their communities. Celtic war chariots, described in detail by classical authors and documented archaeologically through the discovery of vehicle remains and specialized equipment, demonstrate remarkable engineering sophistication and tactical innovation that produced mobile fighting platforms capable of operating effectively in various terrain conditions while serving as prestigious symbols of elite status and military effectiveness that required extensive training and specialized support personnel to maintain and operate. The archaeological record of Celtic fortifications reveals advanced knowledge of military engineering and defensive strategy that produced fortress systems capable of withstanding prolonged sieges, while also serving as administrative centers, trade hubs, and ceremonial sites that supported the complex social and economic activities necessary for maintaining large-scale political organizations during periods of frequent warfare and territorial competition. Celtic siege warfare capabilities, evidenced through archaeological investigation of attack settlements and classical accounts of Celtic military operations, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of assault techniques, engineering principles, and psychological warfare that allowed Celtic armies to capture heavily fortified positions, while also defending their own territories against equally determined opponents, using innovative tactics and technologies adapted to local conditions and available resources. The organization of Celtic military forces appears to have been based on combinations of kinship groups, warrior societies, and territorial units that provided both flexibility in deployment and strong motivation in combat, with archaeological evidence suggesting that Celtic armies could coordinate operations across large territories while maintaining the individual initiative and personal courage that characterized Celtic warrior culture throughout its long history. Celtic military training and warrior initiation practices, preserved partially in later literary sources, but also evidenced through analysis of burial patterns, weapon distributions, and settlement organization, reveal comprehensive educational systems that prepared young men and women for military service, while also transmitting cultural values, tactical knowledge, and social obligations essential for maintaining community defense and territorial integrity. The role of women in Celtic warfare appears to have been more prominent than in many contemporary civilizations, with archaeological evidence including female burials with weapons and armor, alongside literary sources describing female warriors, military leaders, and even specialized warrior training schools that prepared women for combat roles and leadership positions within military organizations that recognize individual merit regardless of gender. Celtic naval warfare capabilities, documented through archaeological discoveries of specialized weapons, ship construction techniques, and coastal fortifications, enabled effective maritime operations that supported both defensive and offensive activities while also facilitating the extensive trade networks and territorial expansion that characterized Celtic civilization during its period of greatest influence and geographical extent. The psychological aspects of Celtic warfare, including the famous war cries, ritualized combat practices, and elaborate ceremonies preceding battles, served important functions in building unique cohesion, intimidating opponents, and maintaining connections to spiritual traditions that provided both practical and religious support for military activities that involve significant personal risk and community investment. Celtic military technology extended beyond individual weapons and armor to include sophisticated techniques of metallurgy, engineering, and logistics that supported large-scale military operations while also contributing to civilian, economic, activities through the development of improved tools, construction techniques, and transportation systems that benefited entire communities regardless of their direct involvement. In military activities, the influence of Celtic military innovations can be traced throughout ancient European warfare, with various non-Celtic peoples adopting Celtic weapons, tactics, and organizational methods that proved their effectiveness through extensive testing and actual combat conditions. While Celtic military traditions also influenced the development of Roman military organization and strategy through both direct conflict and the recruitment of Celtic warriors into Roman auxiliary units that served throughout the empire. Celtic art and craftsmanship during the Latin period achieved levels of sophistication, technical excellence, and aesthetic innovation that established Celtic artistic traditions as among the most influential and distinctive in the ancient world, with archaeological discoveries continuing to reveal new examples of Celtic creativity and skill that demonstrate not only individual artistic achievement, but also the existence of sophisticated cultural institutions capable of supporting specialized training, technological development, and artistic experimentation across multiple generations of craftsmen and artists. The development of distinctive Celtic artistic styles represents a remarkable synthesis of indigenous European traditions, with influences from Mediterranean and other foreign sources, creating unique aesthetic approaches that maintain their cultural identity while continuously evolving through processes of innovation, cross-cultural exchange, and adaptation to changing social and economic conditions that characterize the dynamic nature of Celtic civilization throughout its long history. Celtic metalworking achievements encompass far more than weapons and jewelry, extending to elaborate cauldrons, mirrors, horse equipment, architectural fittings, religious objects, and countless other items that demonstrate mastery of advanced techniques including casting, forging, engraving, enameling, and decorative inlay work that required years of training to perfect and produce objects, whose quality and beauty continue to inspire admiration and scholarly investigation more than 2 millennia after their creation. The famous Latin artistic style, characterized by flowing curvilinear designs, sophisticated techniques of stylization and abstraction, and creative integration of plant, animal, and geometric motifs, represents one of the most distinctive and influential decorative traditions ever developed, with its influence traceable not only throughout ancient Celtic territories, but also in the artistic traditions of neighboring peoples, who adopted and adapted Celtic design principles for their own cultural purposes. Archaeological analysis of Celtic workshops and production sites reveals highly organized systems of craft specialization that supported both local needs and extensive trade networks, with evidence of standardized training programs, quality control measures, technological innovation, and artistic experimentation that maintain the high standards and creative vitality that characterize Celtic material culture, while also ensuring the transmission of essential skills and knowledge to successive generations of craftsmen. Celtic textile production, documented through both surviving examples preserved in favorable archaeological conditions and the elaborate bronze and iron tools used in various stages of cloth manufacturing, achieve remarkable levels of technical sophistication and aesthetic refinement that influence fashion and decorative traditions throughout ancient Europe, while also serving important social functions in displaying status, cultural identity, and regional affiliations through distinctive patterns, colors, and construction techniques. The discovery of Celtic glassworking sites and products reveals another area of remarkable technical achievement, with Celtic craftsmen developing innovative techniques for producing both utilitarian and decorative glass objects that competed successfully with Mediterranean products, while also creating distinctive styles and forms that reflected Celtic aesthetic preferences and cultural values, rather than simply copying foreign models. Celtic stone sculpture, found throughout Celtic territories in forms ranging from abstract decorative elements to complex narrative scenes, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of both artistic principles and technical methods that produced monuments and architectural elements capable of withstanding centuries of weathering, while maintaining their visual impact and cultural significance for the communities that commissioned and maintained them. The integration of Celtic artistic motifs and techniques into various functional objects, including pottery, wooden implements, leather goods, and bone artifacts, reveals the pervasive influence of aesthetic considerations in Celtic material culture, with even mundane household items often receiving decorative treatment that elevated everyday activities to artistic expressions and reinforced cultural identity through constant visual reminders of shared aesthetic traditions and values. Celtic coinage, introduced during the later Latine period through contact with Mediterranean civilizations, quickly developed distinctive artistic characteristics that combine Celtic design principles with the practical requirements of monetary systems, producing coins whose artistic quality and technical sophistication rivaled those of contemporary Greek and Roman issues, while also serving important functions in expressing political authority, religious beliefs, and cultural identity. The regional variation within Celtic artistic traditions demonstrates both the unity and diversity of Celtic culture, with local artistic schools developing particular specializations and distinctive characteristics, while maintaining participation in broader networks of stylistic influence and technical innovation that ensured continued evolution and refinement of artistic traditions without losing their essential Celtic character or cultural significance.